Thank you all for being here. Today, this morning's a special morning. We've got a great grand rounds. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And I just want to make a couple of introductory comments because several years ago, Dr. Pellegrini, recognizing the importance of inclusiveness and diversity in the department, created a diversity council. And this is co-led by Dr. Reyes and Dr. Quiroga. They've been doing a great job of working on issues of trying to minimize barriers to promotion and development and recruitment within the Department of Surgery, wanting our department to look more like the patients that we care for. In 2016, as I considered the issues regarding gender, which are related to but not exactly the same as issues commonly dealt with our Diversity Council, it really seemed worthwhile to do something similar for women and gender issues in the department. And with some guidance from the women in the Department of Surgery, we created a Women's Council. And this has been chaired by Dr. Kristine Calhoun, and we've got together a great group of women, faculty and residents within the Department of Surgery, with the charge being to evaluate issues relating to gender in the department and beyond, not limited to the department, but within our system that might be problems or barriers or challenges to overcome, and to advise me and the department about that so that we could try to address those with the goal of our department being the best place to be a resident, the best place to be a faculty member for everybody in terms of career opportunity, satisfaction, and work-life balance. And so Dr. Calhoun and the team on the Women's Council have been doing a lot of work, and one of the things that we wanted to do is have a grand rounds to recognize some of what they've been doing. So we have Dr. Calhoun, Dr. Shalhub, and Dr. Zern, who are all going to talk this morning about a survey and some of the other issues that they've been looking at in the Women's Council. Very much appreciate the work that they're doing, and I think you'll find it interesting. Thank you, Chris.
So good morning. Again, I'm Dr. Calhoun. I know most of you in the room. I've had the honor of chairing the Women's Council now for about a year and a half. Our co-speakers will be Dr. Shalhub and Dr. Zern. We're going to be sharing the podium on this. I'd like to welcome a couple of visitors, Dr. Sorowitz, and just welcome you to this. As it was mentioned, we've been a Women's Council for about a year and a half now. We're going to focus mostly on the survey that a number of you, if you were here in 2016, 2017, had a chance to participate in. A very minor snapshot version of this was actually presented to the division chiefs a couple of weeks ago, and so this is really going to be expanded on. And so I think we would be remiss if we didn't start with talking about what is the state of women in academic medicine. And this is really for all aspects of medicine, not just surgery. In 2013 and 2014, roughly half of applicants to medical school were women. About 47% of medical students were women, and 46% of residents. You have some dips as you go down into the academic ranks. Faculty were 38%. We had 21% full professors, and 16% of the deans of medical schools were actually women. What's the state in academic surgery? We actually have data on that. This was from 2015. 38% of trainees nationally were women in surgery residencies. Amongst the assistant professors, it dipped down a little bit, 25%, so we're a little less represented than academic medicine as a whole. 19% of the associate professors, and then just under 10% for full professors. I do want to highlight that we've been doing better. So in 1994, the percentages were roughly 10% lower for both the assistant and associate level, and about 5%, 6% less for full professors. So there has been a gradual trend and increase in the last 20 years, and this is data that was really from 2014. However, I would like to point to the bottom graph and the number of years it's going to take us to actually reach equality in numbers. For assistant professors, it's going to take 49 years for us to reach 50%. 57 years for the associate professors, and an astounding 121 years for women to be 50% of the full professors. So how are we doing within the Department of Surgery here? This is from 2016, 2017. There's some variability and there's some change, particularly amongst the residents. We've also added a few women faculty. We took this because this was really the cohort that answered the survey. We had 37% of our trainees, with increases from the interns at being 19% to the seniors, which we took as the fours and the chiefs as being 56%. Amongst the women faculty, we had 100% of our acting assistants, 15% assistant, 6% associate, and 5% of our professors. And we make up 25% of the overall faculty. For 2017 and 2018, there's a little bit more equality amongst the intern class in particular. So as was mentioned by Dr. Wood, we met as a cohort of women faculty, and really this was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it was interesting dialogue. I think it was very open dialogue, and it did raise the potential that there were some issues. And I think Dr. Wood then said, you know, let's get a council together and let's address some of these. And I think it really, the mandate came from the chairman, but he has given us full reign to really address and do what we want with this council. It was assembled by volunteerism as well as asking for really fair representation. We didn't want it to just be a University of Washington Medical Center group. We really wanted it to represent all of our practice sites, and we do have someone in all of the divisions except for pediatric surgery. And we do have resident representation. We have assistant, associate, and professor. We have been meeting monthly with the exception of my recent maternity leave where we were just basically finalizing and maturing the data from the survey. But I really do want to thank the additional women council members, and these are them, because I think we have come together and we have all of the practice sites, as I mentioned, except for children's, and I think we're really a diverse group. There are partnered, not partnered, traditional, non-traditional, child-free, and women with children. And so I think we represent all of the various aspects of being a woman in faculty medicine. So our initial work, really, we had to figure out what we wanted to do. As was mentioned, there was a need to really figure out, assess the state of the state. And we really came down, we talked about a bunch of different aspects that we'd like to focus on, and we really have come down to these four: mentorship, promotion, leadership, and education, as well as just general transparency. And we really needed to start off with, how are we doing in 2016, 2017? And that's really where this survey that a number of you received and were willing to answer, and we do thank you for doing that, this Career Barriers Inventory Survey. The mandate was we needed to find something that had been validated, and we really didn't want it to be so blatantly gender-driven. We wanted to incorporate some other issues, but we did really want to focus on gender more than diversity and some other things that had already been asked of the group. And so this Career Barriers Inventory Survey is a tool that's really applicable to any field. It is not just for healthcare. It can be used in law enforcement, law, medicine, education. And it's really a sound survey that's multidimensional, and it's a self-reporting instrument. It looks at career decision-making, transitions, job performance, work-related discrimination amongst a variety of different aspects, and also work and family balance. It has had 2 iterations, and we made a third. The original CBI had 120 questions. We figured no one here would really answer a 120-question survey. It had been modified a number of years ago to a 70-item question survey, and we still thought, busy surgeons, that's going to be too much. And so we culled down, and we really got rid of orientation questions, diversity questions, things that we felt had already been asked, and really focused on 37 questions. So it's kind of a copy of a copy, but this is the modified career barriers, and these are the scales that they're looking at. And the questions are really made to cull out aspects of this. And we did not ask all of these, but I just put this up for sort of context. For our internal survey, we received IRB approval. We were actually exempt because it was a survey tool. We asked the residents and the faculty, and we started off with some demographic questions. The demographics were slightly different between the faculty and the residents. We asked for level and academic rank, whether you, as a resident, were a categorical or a prelim. We asked relationship status of both groups, gender status of both groups, and the number of children. For the residents, we were interested in career goals. Were you interested in a fellowship? Were you interested in academics or private? And then because we were asking some financial questions, we also asked for an approximate medical school debt. The 37 actual questions that were asked of the group were identical with just a little bit of phrasing difference. We asked in your residency versus in your career. But they were the same general questions. They were the same questions that we thought were potential perceived career barriers, and then asked of those barriers, did you have confidence to overcome them? For our survey, there was a lot of dialogue in terms of what's the best avenue to get this survey out to people, and initially we were going to do it on a RegCap and a web-based tool, but it was interesting. More recent graduates on the council, as well as our resident representation, said that there is some people think it's dubious that those online surveys are actually truly anonymous. And so we felt that for the residents in particular, because some of this could be deemed to be very charged information, we felt that doing a paper-based survey that would truly make it anonymous was the best. And we actually obtained permission from all of the different residencies: plastics, general surgery, thoracic, and vascular. And we went to their in-training exams and handed out this survey. We did not do any analysis of data, nor did we actually add the data in until all of the in-training exams were done, and we shuffled them all together. So I cannot cull out which is the plastics group, which is the vascular. We really did that to protect the anonymity of the smaller groups, and we really just wanted this to be truly anonymous. There were 98 surveys amongst the residents that were given out, and 37% again were women. For the faculty, we didn't really have a forum for having everyone captive in one audience, and so we did actually do a RegCap survey, and I would like to really thank Nicole, Dr. Zern, for coming up with the survey and administering it. And we sent out a couple of reminders, and we did get a pretty good response. There were 110 faculty, active faculty at the time that it was sent out, with, again, 25% of those being women. So it's been a while. I can sometimes not remember what happened last week. This was a year ago, and so these were just some sample questions. You were asked to basically scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. The general questions were: in my surgical residency, or if you were faculty, in my surgical career, I have. And then there were a number of questions, such as been treated differently because of my gender, experienced negative comments about my gender. We also, again, asked about the career barriers. There was a list of these career barriers, and we said, do you believe these will be, or have they been, a barrier to your career in surgery? And then we asked for the confidence to actually overcome those barriers, and those were matched. The barriers that were potentially identified, as well as those that you would overcome, were lined up exactly. So, what is the data? And I will hand this over to my esteemed colleague.
Good morning, and I do want to thank everybody who took the time to fill out the answers to the surveys. Obviously, we wouldn't have these data to present it. And so when we started analyzing the data, the way the data sets were distributed were the general questions of, these are the statements, agree to disagree, and then there was the barrier quantification. What do you perceive as barriers with different barriers? And then the next set of questions had to do with the confidence to overcome that. And so as soon as you start analyzing, you realize that the scales, the way they fit, they actually are along thematic domains. And those are the 5 thematic domains. The career confidence, the career domain, which include confidence in your career, money, and mentorships, social support among family, friends, and attitudes as they relate to your specialty or your surgical career. Gender domains, children, and family. And so that's how the data will be presented next. And we compared the responses by gender. Initially, it was just along the gender divides, and then we realized that there was actually differences even within the generations between faculty and residents, and so we separated those as well and looked at them more closely. And basically, it's just straight up comparisons between the groups. And so This is, you just saw the distribution of the Department of Surgery at the time of the administration of the questionnaire. And so the women will be in green, the men responses will be in yellow, and we categorize them based on the rank, the academic rank at that time. And so the first thing is the response to the survey. So overall, pretty good response to the survey, as you saw from what Chris had just presented. So we had about 80% categorical residents in this group mix. And you can see in the shaded boxes are the people who didn't respond. So you can see that it dipped a little bit among the faculty who were men, as well as the residents who were men, and then a little bit higher among the faculty and residents who were women. But still pretty high response rate, 74% among the residents, and then 66% response among the faculty. And then again, I just broke it down so you can see how what the response percentages were within each category. So we'll talk about the career domain first. And we'll start with money problems as a career barrier. So this is one where the perception of money problems as a career barrier did not show any gender differences. Certainly it was a concern among residents more so than faculty. So the good news for the residents is that hopefully this concern will go away as you finish. And so that's where it really stood out. It was a little bit more higher among the residents who were men compared to the residents who were women. But what was interesting about that, and you can see the differences within the groups, but what was interesting is that really concern was more associated with the amount of medical school debt that this person was carrying, whether they were men or women. And so that's just was interesting to see that makes sense. Certainly more residents than faculty had confidence in overcoming this barrier. And so that's the confidence questions when you look at just how many people felt that this was hopefully not an issue. So about 84% among the residents who were women and 74% of the residents who were men had confidence that this is not going to be a barrier in the future, that they will overcome that, more so than the faculty. Although, again, the faculty overall did not perceive money to be a barrier per se. When it comes to role models and mentors, that was very interesting from the standpoint of 2 points to highlight. So in the light yellow are the responses that say, I disagree and strongly disagree. I'm sorry, I said yellow, blue, these blue categories. So that's disagree and strongly disagree. And you can see that a fairly high number of residents and faculty disagree with this statement, meaning lack of role models is a career barrier. The other interesting fact is that those who did agree or said, I strongly agree or agree, those are in the purplish colors, which are the light ones down there. And you can see that there was a higher percentage of women, both among the residents and the faculty, who felt that that was a barrier. And so it almost looked like among the men, there was definitely a trend towards saying most of them disagree with that statement, whereas among the women, there was more diversity in that group of their perception of mentorship being a barrier to the career or lack of mentorship. And then we broke it down by faculty levels because that was interesting to see if that mattered. Like, is this something you see early in your career or is it something you see later in your career? And all along, you can see again the women are in the yellow bars and then the men are in the green bars. And you can see at every rank level is definitely higher among the women compared to the men. What about the confidence to overcome the lack of role models? This was a generational thing that we thought was very interesting, is that the younger the surgeon, the more confidence and hope they had that this would be a barrier to overcome. So you can see here again that among the women and the men, it was pretty high, 64 to 57% when you're early in your career. But then these numbers do go down the more senior you become along your career. What about confidence, having enough confidence as a career barrier? This was definitely universally higher among women compared to men. This was not surprising. I mean, we've heard this before where men tend to have more confidence than women in general. And so again, in green are the women, and you can see that definitely with the strongly agree and agree, it was a much higher percentage of women answering yes to that statement. And the flip side, it was very low among men. You can see that among our assistant professors and associate professor levels, the numbers are very, very low, 0. So that's great. What about social support among friends, family, and attitudes about your career? So there's no differences. It was great to see that in terms of family attitudes about surgeries, about your support from your significant others or your friends, that there was no difference among the genders. Everybody felt that that was fairly, well, it's evenly distributed, I should say. Relationships concerns specifically as a career barrier. It wasn't really necessarily different among the residents, but if you look at the raw numbers or the percentages, you can see that a higher number, fairly high number among both the young men and women in terms of finding that as a concern. But again, a little bit higher among the men who disagree. So it's sort of a bell shape almost. And what about family concerns? So a high number of our residents and faculty are have a family, either they're married or partnered. You can see that 76% and 60% respectively among the women and men in our residents, and then over 80% in our faculty. And I just put them side by side to, again, just show you an idea of how it falls out. And you can see that, again, the light blues and the darker blues are the ones that say, I disagree or strongly disagree. And they're fairly high among the groups where family problems is a career barrier. So that's not a thematic thing that showed up as a career barrier. And confidence to overcome was fairly high. So at least I'm happy to say that it seems like we have a department that's very well supported by their families. So I'll turn it next to Nicole, and she'll take it from here.
Thank you. All right. Morning. All right, the next domain that we assessed with the survey was concerns related to children and childcare specifically. The questions that we asked were, I've had difficulty obtaining childcare, or I view childcare as a barrier in my career. Similarly, from a demographic standpoint, you can see the amount of residents and faculty that do have children at the current time. There was a predominance of both women and male faculty, but less so at the resident level. When questioning whether the desire to have children was viewed as a career barrier, this was significantly prominent amongst the women residents. You can see about almost 70% viewed their desire to have children as a potential barrier to a career in surgery, whereas by the time those women were faculty, this had dropped to approximately 30%, so much less. But still overall, compared to men, women had much more concern in this domain. Another question regarding specifically child care concerns, is this a barrier to your career in surgery? Similarly, more women than men felt that this was in fact a concern, and this was also more prevalent amongst the residents than the faculty, although not nearly to the scale that the desire to have children was. Our final domain that we assessed was that of gender. There were 8 questions overall that assessed this, including, as Dr. Calhoun had mentioned earlier, statements such as, I have been treated differently because of my gender, I've experienced negative comments about my gender, and then also, is my gender a career barrier? Among both faculty and the residents, there were more women who perceived different treatment, negative comments, and had experienced gender discrimination compared to the men. And this was statistically significant in both cohorts of residents and faculty. Similarly, there were more women than men that reported that their gender and attitudes about their gender were barriers to their careers. And in fact, there were no men at either the resident or faculty level that identified gender as a career barrier. Similar to the other domains in our study, and as Dr. Shalhub mentioned, the sort of generational aspect of this study, the residents seem to overall be more confident in their ability to overcome these barriers. And this was also present within the gender domain as well. The faculty felt that they weren't necessarily had the confidence to overcome these barriers, but the residents felt that they were confident that they could overcome gender as a barrier to their success in surgery. Because there were 8 questions in this domain, we didn't make slides for each of them, but a representative sample is shown here. This specific question related to experiencing discrimination because of my sex or gender. And here you can see sort of the raw numbers. Overall, most of the men disagreed with the statement. They had in fact not experienced discrimination, but women had. And finally, the last one was experiencing negative comments specifically about gender. You can also see that with the purple bars, again as before, women responded that they in fact agree. They have experienced negative comments about their gender much more than men. There were no male residents that had indicated that this had happened. And at the faculty level, this was a very low number of men. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Calhoun.
So with any study, any survey, there are some potential limitations, and we realize that this one, there are potential. We didn't get 100% response rate. We got a good response rate. Our goal was at least 50%, and we hit that amongst both the faculty and the residents. But we realized that the people who responded may not be 100% the overall attitude of the department. So we could be lacking in some of our expectations, our knowledge based on the response rate. We did not put in questions about orientation, diversity, other things. And so this concept of intersectionality, we really are just being able to cull out gender. We cannot say, is there any influence of other aspects of the person that might influence their decisions and their responses. And then it was a copy of a copy, as I mentioned, so it's not a 100% validated survey, but we felt confident using this tool because the overall tool had really been validated in a number of different forums. So conclusions, I think we can make some based on our data. There's extensive data about gender-driven issues dating back to the 1990s, and our results are very much in keeping and very much in line with a lot that's reported back to 1990. We do feel that our survey results do state that for academic surgeons, more women than men perceived the lack of role models and mentors, the desire to have children and childcare concerns, and attitudes about gender as career barriers. The confidence to overcome these barriers was higher amongst residents than faculty, as was mentioned. And this raises a question. Are we truly doing better in that graph as it's coming up? Is there more knowledge about this, and are we doing better? Or is this perception of gender discrimination, does it increase as women move up or move up in the ranks? Residents can be, they haven't had some of the issues, particularly when you start as an intern, that potentially the more senior residents and then the faculty, and so that may have played into it as well. But we do feel that women face unique challenges in academic surgery at all levels of training and rank. So we really want to focus and take this knowledge and use it to better gender issues within the department. And this is not a women versus men thing. That is not the message of this. We really want the department to be a good forum and a good place for everybody, regardless of gender. We kind of pulled out a couple that we've been working on based on this, and one was family concerns and mentorship. Family concerns are definitely amongst both faculty and residents, and we are currently working on drafting a policy that particularly applies to some of this, and I call it the pre, peri, and post gestational policy. It's looking at issues such as how long should a pregnant faculty or resident have to operate? What's their clinical responsibilities? What's their call? And then really not just having maternity leave. There currently is a fairly defined maternity leave policy within the department and also at the resident levels, but there really is nothing on paternity or adoption. So we really have some avenues that we really want to look into. And then also lactation support. For mentorship, this was surprising, at least to me, that mentorship was at the faculty level actually a potential barrier. And so we really want to take the Women's Council is really looking at this. And our next step is for the faculty, I'm putting in a plug for another survey that's coming. I know there's survey fatigue, but we really want to get an idea in terms of promotion. How was the mentorship that you received for that? Because our goal is to really come up with a mentorship program and start with start at the faculty level and help with promotion, but then also expand it to the resident level so that fellowships and career guidance that can be done as well. And then just general education. There's a lot of talk about transparency, and I think that we really want to be transparent about this. As Dr. Wood mentioned, this is our first grand rounds, and we actually have asked for February to sponsor the grand rounds as the Women's Council. And it's really because National Women's Physician Day is February 3rd. We really want this to kind of be Women's Month. And so I just wanted to wish a belated happy National Women Physicians Day, that's a mouthful, to the women faculty. These are all of our faculty, as well as all of our residents. And you can see we're doing better. We have a bigger representation, and I just want to thank all of the women. And with that, we're ending a little bit early, and we specifically designed this. We really wanted to open it up for dialogue and suggestions and thoughts. But really, the council is made up of women. There's been a lot of discussion in terms of should it be a women's council entirely made up of women, and at this time it is. But we really value all faculty, and we really are welcoming of collaboration regardless of gender on projects that are dealing with some of these issues, and really issues that affect us all. And so I'm very proud of the council. I think we've made really good inroads, and I really want to thank all of the council members. There's a number of them here. And at this point, I'll turn it over for questions of any of us.
Good job, Chris.
I want to make a couple of comments, and we really do have time for questions. So this is a great time to have a dialogue about some of the issues that have been raised in this survey. But you can see the incredible work that the Women's Council is doing. And one of the things that Dr. Calhoun and I talked about is work that shines a light on and improves how we deal with gender issues in the department and in UW-Medicine. But also to look for opportunities for academic output, that we have something that can be published and that the team working on it can get academic credit for, and that we can further expand the experience here and help it influence other departments and other universities as well. So, and it's always good to celebrate small victories. So actually, I didn't think about putting this photo up. I wish that I had. So this past weekend, I was at the American College of Surgeons Board of Regents meeting. As you all know, Dr. Mayer is president-elect, but we recognized at dinner that that all of the senior leadership of the American College of Surgeons were women, 100%. So the president of the American College of Surgeons is Barbara Bass. The chair of the Board of Regents is Lee Newmeyer. The chair of the Board of Governors is Diana Farmer, who was here for Grand Rounds last year. And the chair of the Committee on Trauma is Eileen Bulger. So I got a photo of those four women who are leading the American College of Surgeons, thinking, this is a great day. This is a small victory where we see some of the progress that we're making in gender diversity in our specialty. So Ron is going to ruin that when he becomes president, because you don't provide that gender diversity, but well, you do actually in this situation. So I want to open it up for questions. So all three of you come up, and I'll get out of the way. But I wanted to recognize Eileen and the college leadership, and thank you for the work you're doing. But questions for Chris, Nicole, Sherene?
Do we stun you? Yes.
So, childcare, huge issue for both genders, right?
Yes.
Especially in residency. And it's an issue not just for the Department of Surgery. I think it's an issue for the entire. I think childcare is an issue that spans, the School of Medicine. So, are there groups that we can, maybe Chris Serraritz can answer this, but are there groups that we can partner with within the School of Medicine to help address the issue of childcare, where we can improve on-site childcare in our hospitals, or near our hospitals, which has been shown to make a huge difference in just peace of mind for parents?
It's a huge dream of mine. A lot of people know I'm a single mom to 2 kids, and if I have to come in the middle of the night, it's a big deal. And I have to arrange for, my parents live an hour away, and I have to arrange for someone. And it's like I would love to have childcare here. to my knowledge, it's not really being, we're not addressing it. I don't know amongst higher levels, but it would definitely be something that I think should be looked at. Yes.
Chris, one of the things I was struck with in reading the book Blind Spot was the fact that so many of these issues are related to implicit bias that can be, we don't even understand. When I, thinking of myself as a liberal male, and I took the implicit bias test, I was flabbergasted at how I had these implicit bias. It seems to me that these generational issues as we evolve are going to take time, but somehow we have to get at an understanding in our constituency of what our implicit biases are. Has your group looked at that, or are there surveys beyond one that just comes from the Women's Council that get at how we actually think, even though we don't realize it, that could be a focus on improvement?
So this has been a hot topic that we've talked about a lot. And last year, we did give a talk on how to promote your career in a biased world. My personal bias is that these differences that we find are related to this implicit bias, because people are well-meaning and want to do well, and it's not coming from a malevolent place. But it is related to our cultural stereotypes that we're brought up with, and depending on where you're brought up, that could be really strong or weaker. Regionally, you can see that in the country. And so step one was to say, let's start the conversation. And this was a great segue of saying this should be the next step. So you have to acknowledge that there is an issue, right? I mean, in the past, if you look at the literature from the 1990s, I mean, nothing has changed in the literature since then. If you review everything that's been written, it says there's an issue, but then nothing happens. And then everybody says, oh, but we're getting better, and then nothing happens. So it stalls, and it doesn't address the root problem as to why this is happening. So step one is, let's say, okay, there are differences, and we now need to take the next step other than just showing that there are differences. This was surprising to me because we think of ourselves as a very liberal city and a very liberal program under leadership that values diversity and women in medicine. And so it was still interesting to see that these issues still surface. And so now that we know that is real and it's a real phenomenon, the next step is to say, let's now find out where, how we can get to the root of it, and then how can we implement change that's lasting. And it's certainly an opportunity for us to lead the way in that, beyond just saying that, yes, there is a problem. So that's our next step.
Yes.
So first a comment about the leadership in the different councils. It was mentioned as a very positive thing, the insight of Dr. Wood of splitting the diversity council from the women's council. Because a lot of times, especially in surgery, we check the diversity card saying that we have a lot of women. And we all know, or I hope that most people know, that the challenges that people of color, and especially women of color, face are different than the women of just being a woman in surgery. So this is February is Black History Month, and I would prefer that we keep it that way, and we'll find another month for women in surgery. But my question for you is, how do we work on this without falling into what's called white feminism?
It's challenging. I don't think there is really an answer. I think that any of the other women in the council?
I mean, I would offer, because Alina and I have talked about this a lot, and I personally am one of these people that I don't know where I fit, right? We've talked about having a leg in either world. I mean, I have a Caucasian mother and a Middle Eastern father, and I don't identify with either. So that's been interesting, because some people view me as a woman of color, and some people view me as a white woman. And again, it's to me, to my core identity, it's not very relevant. That said, one of the things we did point out is that this does not address intersectionality, and we do know that issue is magnified. I think it depends on the best research methodology to do that. I mean, some of the descriptive type of research where you interview people and you hone in onto issues of that may be helpful in that department. It's very challenging from a research perspective as well, because there's always a backlash that and it's an unbiased, it's a implicit backlash that happens. It's almost like there's a punishment that goes when you raise that issue. And again, it's not, I don't know that it's a conscious thing, but there's also research to show that once you start highlighting these issues, then the position of the women or the minority becomes worse off than where they started had the issues not been brought up to the surface. So again, being aware of these biases are important, and then maybe collaborating, having a cross-section between diversity and the Women's Council to address that specifically.
Great job, guys. I think the gals, I guess. Gals, guys. That's not my term. But I think one of the concepts that comes up is some of the education that happens. Chris, you and I are on the admissions committee for the School of Medicine, and part of that is you have to look at all of these videos, and a lot of times you just click through them. But I'll tell you, there are some resources where I've learned a lot, on these concepts. And if you're on a chief search, whatever, you have to sit through these things. Perhaps having these educational videos on a diversity website where you can look at it, I mean, particularly the concept of microaggression, all of these things that come out, when you look at it, you're like, wow, I could see that happening. And I think that these concepts that we have the access to, that could be put into one section, perhaps on the web, under the Women's Council or something, would be a nice area to have that.
I think it's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, suggestion of the website.
March 8th is International Women's Day, so maybe you should take March.
We could, yeah.
One of the most disturbing statistics you showed was that we're 100 years off from gender parity for full professors.
121.
121. Does your data suggest what those promotion barriers for women are? You said mentorship. I heard mentorship, I heard confidence. I don't know that confidence is enough to get promotion, but can you identify more specific obstacles that seem to block that assistant to associate role?
There's actually been a lot of analysis of that in the data, and we didn't specifically look at it, but in the past it had been that a lot of women in surgery would defer childbearing, and then when they were hired at the assistant level, then there's a biologic clock that they have to deal with. And so there are studies that show that the time to promotion is longer for women faculty versus male faculty because of biologic issues in young children. It just makes it harder. And then I think that might just kind of follow along in each of the career levels. There's been a lot of look into how promoted, not from assistant to associate, but how promoted within the ranks of surgery are women in leadership positions. I think Andy just did an abstract on the representation of women in leadership positions, and in the past it's been very low. I think the ACS representation of all of those leaders being women, that is definitely not something that's been in the past. And so in the past, women were less promoted, and it may be that it's a very broad statement to say, well, we don't promote ourselves as well, but that may actually be the case. And then I think that it just all segues. There's fewer opportunities is what the literature has suggested, which take longer for women to actually meet some of the benchmarks for promotion. It's very multifactorial.
Chris touched on this a little bit too, but our next survey rendition is going to focus a lot more specifically on the promotion aspect and what other factors besides what we mentioned with this survey are specific to that and may influence that, because we didn't want to make that the focus of this one, but just kind of a small piece. But next one will be primarily looking at that.
Andy, sorry.
Just to comment on we're working on a research project looking at representation of women at various surgical societies, and it highly varies. So some surgical societies actually have an over-representation of women, not by very much, but some have a vast underrepresentation, and that's compared to their membership. So if you have 25% membership, but only 10% of women who are either in leadership or who are asked to moderate at a national meeting or asked to present at a national meeting, that's a real problem of not mentorship, but actually sponsorship, which is a different concept of helping promote and helping to bring up folks, either for gender or diversity or inclusivity.
I do want to comment on that, and it ties into what you just asked about in terms of promotion. So there's an extensive body of literature that shows, again, that men have more confidence than women in general, so that is true. Men are more likely to promote themselves, that is true. Men are more likely to apply at the jobs that they are not qualified for, much more than women that would. That is also true. That said, along those lines, there's also within the academic literature, there says that people are more likely to be put up for promotion prematurely, or not prematurely, but more likely to be nominated for promotions versus women. That it's in line with that same theme, right? It's just that men are promoted based on potential or advocated for based on potential, whereas women need to prove that they can do the job and then are promoted. And it's both, whether it's this internalized stereotype where women maybe have less confidence and want to do it perfectly before they move on, or just overall societal stereotype.
First, I want to congratulate you for doing this. I think congratulate Doug as well for creating the council. I think this takes courage, because you sort of look at something that is a little bit self-serving, right? Advancing a certain cause, and I want to give you credit for having the courage. I wanted to make one comment and then maybe inject a little bit of optimism in what you're saying. My comment refers to the fact that the more I look primarily into the diversity issues, the more I am convinced that we have to pay a lot of attention to the intersectionality. As Sherene pointed out, you are a woman, but you're a bunch of other things in addition to being a woman. Being a man is not just being a man. We know, for example, because there's extensive literature, in fact today, in The Economist, you can read that if you're a tall man, by tall is defined at 6 foot or higher, you make on the average $5,000 more a year than if you are a shorter man. If you're a fat man, you make less money than if you're a thin man. If you're a sports person, you make a lot less. So when you start looking at all those things, you realize that men are not just men, and women are not just women. And I would say take advantage of the fact that you are rallying around a certain cause to go beyond that and to say, like you're saying, child care, as Eileen was pointing out, is a problem of society, not a problem necessarily. It's a problem that society has given to women, saying, you take care of it, right? And women have accepted that. But children are the children of usually parents, and somebody has to take care of them. And so that concept of intersectionality is something that appeals to me a lot. On the optimistic side, as I have looked at what happens, I think there are two things that are very positive. One is the things that some organizations have done. The American College of Surgeons has taken the issue of diversity seriously, and that is what has led to the current situation, where not only the president, but the first vice president, the second vice president, chairs of the committees, etc. So the college has taken that. So that is one way to advance the cause. The other one is that if you look at what is happening on leadership right now, look, the last 5 large departments of surgery in the last year and a half that have had selection of a chair have selected a woman to be chair, right? And that includes places like Stanford, places like North Carolina, places that are very well known. So I think there is a bit of a recognition or rebound that we as a society have not actually taken advantage of half of the society for leadership positions and have left it behind. The other one is the fact that, yes, we have a lot less full professors right now that are women, and you compare that with the 38% women that are now residents in surgery. The full professors of today, right, come from a group of residents in surgery where less than 10% were women. So as that group advances through the promotions, I think we're going to see a much faster than 120 some years before you have some kind of equity there.
Hope so.
So I'll just make a comment to close things up from Dr. Pellegrini's great comments, because I think an important principle, Dr. Quiroga brought it up, Dr. Pellegrini emphasized it, Dr. Shalhub mentioned it, is that we are more than our gender. So this is one issue, and it's an issue where there are clear differences, and we have some results to show it. But one of the, as I was thinking about our Women's Council, Initially, I really talked about it for the Department of Surgery and recognized that we work within a world that is well beyond the Department of Surgery, that a lot of these things that impact us are even within our own environment, our hospitals, UW-Medicine, the school, and then there's society. So we're not in a bubble that is independent from all of those. And so we want to address the issues in a generalizable way and considering all the issues, including beyond the department. And my ultimate view is issues that we identify that may be related to gender are goals to improve the atmosphere, the opportunities for everyone. So I expect the work that we do on improvement in gender diversity and identifying and removing barriers that are relating to gender or other aspects of differences improve us all, improve even the situation for white males. So my goal in this work that Chris and the team are doing and that Jorge and Elena are doing in the Diversity Council is that the improvements or identification of problems or barriers that we identify and can work on make us all better and are equally relevant to the old white males, that's the demographic that I fit in, to the young residents who are early in their career and who represent a wide number of aspects of diversity, gender, and socioeconomic background, cultural background, all these things that make us different and enrich us by all being together and getting to rub shoulders with each other every day. So thank you, Sherene, Chris, Nicole, and appreciate you all being here and the great questions and discussion. Thanks.